Hey, I'm Dr. Don Russell. I'm a professional psychotherapist, speaker, and a trainer. I work in the area of trauma treatment and recovery. I work with healing, helping people heal from vicarious trauma and complex post-traumatic stress disorder. In this video, I want to talk about the connection between relationships and difficulties that couples have resolving conflict in their relationship and trauma. You know, lots of my work is with couples in committed relationships that come and they talk to me because the relationship is getting difficult and problematic, and most importantly, it's getting painful. When we start talking about what's not working in the relationship, inevitably they start saying something about we're not able to communicate. We have trouble communicating. And then in the conversation, when we drill down a little bit deeper, they describe that they get into these stupid fights about stupid things, and the conflict just gets worse and worse, and they can't resolve it, and in lots of cases they feel like they're at the end of the rope, and this relationship is going to end if they can't figure this out. So they believe that they can't communicate very well, and they believe that they have poor conflict resolution skills. But the funny thing is, I mean, funny for me, and not really funny, these are couples that are articulate and they communicate just fine in other contexts and in other relationships. I ask them, so at work, can you communicate with your boss or with the people that answer to you? Do you communicate with your peers or customers very well? And they say, yeah. The weird thing is, this isn't a problem in those other relationships. In the committed romantic relationship, what shows up are what John and Julie Gottman call the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. And I think that's a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek term that they've created and they are using to describe four key patterns that they've identified show up in relationships that they've identified from their research are destructive and actually predict the demise of the relationship. So here's John and Julie Gottman's Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse that they call the killers of marital bliss or couples bliss. The first one is criticism. Not surprisingly, criticism is really destructive to relationships. And that's basically an attack on the character or the personality of the person. We all make mistakes, and when your partner makes a mistake in the relationship and it bothers or upsets you, it's one thing to complain about the specific mistake. Hey, you're leaving your socks on the floor all the time, that bugs me. But it's another thing to criticize. Hey, you're a slob. The next killer of couples bliss is defensiveness. Basically, not being open to any feedback and shutting down any kind of feedback back about you, and blame shifting and just blocking any feedback. Not accepting responsibility, not being accountable for yourself. Third one is contempt. They identify as this one as actually the most destructive. It's a form of superiority, looking down on the other person. Basically, it's going to show up as sarcasm, mockery, or kind of cutting humor, cynicism. Basically, if you catch yourself rolling your eyes at your partner, then you're probably using contempt. And then the fourth one is stonewalling in a relationship, basically shutting down emotionally, shutting down verbally, leaving the room. I don't want to talk about it. That sort of thing is stonewalling. And obviously, we're never going to have resolution of a conflict if we're if we're using stonewalling, or really if we're using any one of these ones. They're just destructive to the relationship. They're actually destructive to conflict resolution. So here's the thing. John and Julie Gottman have written in several books that are available at bookstores or online, written about these things and how they're destructive to a relationship. And fortunately, they also write about here's what you should be doing instead to maintain constructive communication. What I want to do in the rest of this video is I want to drill down a little bit deeper, because as important as those things are to identify, I'm convinced that they're actually symptoms of a difficulty, and if we're going to improve the quality of the relationship long term in a sustainable way, we actually have to move beyond the symptoms, and we have to get at why people are using those destructive patterns. The actual problems that are going on that are creating those symptoms are very frequently activation of trauma survival responses that is preventing one person or the other person, or actually usually both people, from being able to communicate effectively with understanding, with empathy. Some authors call this amygdala hijacking or limbic system hijacking. What we're talking about here is our mind and our mind and body is feeling a sense of threat from our partner, and that sense of threat activates this fight, flight, freeze response, what I'm going to describe in a little bit more detail in a second. It activates this fight, flight, freeze response, and it's basically an animal protective, defensive, survival response, because our mind and body is feeling threatened, and this system in the brain is very poor at discerning real danger from imaginary danger. It's really good at being fast, like quick responding to possible danger, and it's really good at focusing our attention on that possible danger, but it's actually really poor at discerning real danger from basically false positives, false alarms. So this amygdala hijacking, when it happens, basically our attention focuses, and our mind, our attention focuses on survival, sensing the threat, and this frontal cortex part of the brain, actually all of the resources, all of the mental and emotional resources there become unavailable. It basically goes offline. So this might show up as a fight response, and that is the couple that, or the individual that keeps arguing and can't take a break from the argument. This is the person that might be saying, "Don't walk away from me, we're going to finish this fight." So contentious, argumentative, and obviously in extreme cases actually verbally and physically dangerous and harmful. Next one is the flight response, and that shows up as a person in a relationship that in times of conflict tends to withdraw emotionally or physically, just wants to leave the room, just wants to check out and watch mindless TV or get onto their screen and tune out watching YouTube videos. Flight response sometimes takes the form of engaging in addictive behaviors, because that's actually a flight from present reality. The third reaction of our threat response system, our animal protective defensive protection system, is as a freeze response. And in relationships, what that looks like is basically the person's thinking process is just kind of shut down or freeze up. And so lots of people say to me, yeah, we got into this fight and my partner was, saying mean or critical things to me, or asking me, about that money that I spent, and I just couldn't think. They said I just couldn't think of an answer. I just couldn't respond to my partner. Well, that's the mind. Really, the mind and the whole body has gone into a freeze response. Deer in the headlights is an expression that goes with freeze response. The fourth autonomic nervous system survival response, I'm calling collapse or submit. This is basically an internal response of hopelessness, helplessness, and I give up, basically like that. And that person will act that out in relationship or in a conflict as just, oh, whatever, do whatever you want to do, I don't care. So basically submitting in a inauthentic way to the other person's point of view or the other person's opinion or the other person's choice. Hey, do you want chicken or beef for supper? I don't care. Make whatever you want. I don't care. That's a collapse submit response. And obviously destructive. The last one I'm going to talk about is much less known, not really well understood by lots of people, including lots of therapists. This is the trauma survival response of what's called attachment cry. So in response to the feeling of emotional threat or threat to the relationship, the person is, with a sense of emotional desperation, will be reaching out for the other person to try and maintain connection. In some cases, against, contrary to what's really best for them. So maybe a classic example of this is an individual that stays in a destructive and abusive relationship, and their friends will say, hey, that person is really not good for you, you should get away, just pack a bag and get away. But this person will, no, I just want to hold on to this relationship because, and then they will supply all kinds of rational arguments. But at the end of the day, underneath what's inside is the only way they feel safe in response to threat is by staying attached to their partner. As I say, even if the partner is really, really not a good person for them. So there's 5 trauma responses that can get reactivated in the context of conflict with a partner. It's really, really important to emphasize that these are not conscious reactions. These are happening, triggered by our nervous system, and particularly our autonomic nervous system. So outside of our conscious awareness and choice. It's just something that's happening to the mind and the body. Just the same as, right now my blood pressure is at a certain level and my heart rate is at a certain rate. That's not something I'm consciously controlling, it's something that's kind of happening to me. Same thing with these trauma responses, these defensive, protective responses. They're automatic within the mind and the body. Second thing to be aware of is they severely compromise our capacity to resolve conflict, to stay engaged in a conversation. In some cases, with some of these animal defense responses, Our nervous system is hyperactivated, so think highly anxious, think panicky. And in some cases, in the collapse, submit, comply response, our nervous system is hypoactivated, so down-regulated, and that's why the person is not being able to think, not being able to feel much except numbness in that case. So if we're going to do good conflict resolution, we need to be in between the hyper state and the hypo state. We need to be in a window where we can think and feel at the same time, and that's called a window of tolerance. If we're in that window of tolerance, then we actually have the ability at that time to have empathy for the other person, to actually care for the other person, to have compassion for the other person. We're able to think creatively, and that's just essential if we're going to solve the problem that is in the conflict. And only if we're in that window are we able to have a deep understanding of the other person's perspective. And finally, if we're in that window, not hyper-activated and not hypo-activated, i.e. shut down, then and only then are we going to be able to tolerate kind of hanging on to the feeling of not being understood in order to be able to understand the other person. Stephen Covey, who wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, really, really popular book, really, really great book. One of his chapters is called, if you want to be really effective in working with other people and living with other people, you need to seek first to understand and then to be understood. Huge. And so what's really necessary in order to do that is we have to be able to hang on to the feeling of not being understood for a short period of time so we can give our partner the feeling of being understood. And that's only possible if we can keep these trauma survival responses subdued and under control. In the next video, I'm going to talk in great length about how to do that. But for now, I really want you to take away the message that if you are finding yourself in unresolvable conflicts because you're getting upset and activated, or your partner's getting upset and activated, you're not thinking clearly, this is not because you're a bad communicator. Remind yourself that you can communicate in other relational contexts. You can communicate with your boss at work. What's happening is you're being hijacked by your autonomic nervous system, something that you don't have immediate and conscious control over. And the good news is that there's both ways to manage this so that the quality of your communication can be improved. And more hopefully, there's powerful ways of quieting this trauma, survival, defensive, and protective responses so that you can stay open to your partner and you can achieve actual communication, even over these difficult topics that you're having conflict over. Hey, thank you for watching this video. As always, I really, really encourage you to comment below. Let me know what other topic you'd like to hear about. I really, really encourage you to subscribe to my channel so that you're first to hear about the next posted video. And of course, have a beautiful, beautiful day.